Now, our next guest is Dr. Timothy Sands, and welcome, Dr. Sands. Dr. Sands is the president of Virginia Tech. He is a native of California, did his undergraduate work at the University of California, where he got engineering degrees and material sciences degrees. For a number of years, he was an academic at Purdue, serving as the provost of Purdue, among other things. For the last, I guess he became the president in 2014 at Virginia Tech, and he is the 16th president of a school which is technically Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. So welcome very much, Dr. Sands.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me.
So Dr. Sands, universities are having a challenge about what to do in bringing students back. Before we get to bringing them back, when did you finally decide earlier this spring that you had to say to your students, go home? What prompted you to do it? And did you do work online with your students, and how did that work out?
In early March, when the pandemic was really clearly going to hit us, we decided to extend spring break. We were really fortunate that our students were off campus at that time, a lot of them anyway. And we extended spring break and flipped to remote learning in a matter of days, 4,500 course sections. Our faculty did an amazing job of that. And we decided to, at that point, cancel in-person classes for the rest of the semester. So it was a very quick decision in a lot of ways, but we had been meeting for weeks because we were dealing with our study abroad students who were in areas of the world that were already experiencing the worst of the pandemic. So it didn't hit us, it wasn't all of a sudden, but the decision was made in a matter of hours to pivot.
How many total students does Virginia Tech have?
About 36,000. Most are in Blacksburg, about 2,000 are in other locations, including 7 sites in Northern Virginia.
And of those 36,000, how many of them actually went home or worked remotely, or how many could not leave the campus?
Well, we had about 10,400 living on campus right before spring break in Blacksburg, and that went down to about 500, a little less than 500 over a matter of weeks. And really, we couldn't close the residence halls completely. We had a lot of students who had no access to the internet, who had the challenging situations at home or couldn't even get home. So we kept the residence halls and dining courts open, but at a very limited capacity.
Now, just give us a brief history of the university. When was the university started?
It was founded in 1872. It's a land-grant institution. It was a military institute back then, and although it seems like an old university, we're about to celebrate our sesquicentennial, it became a state university in 1970, a comprehensive university. So we also have a young vibe going on at Virginia Tech. We have a new health science and technology campus in Roanoke, and you probably have heard of the innovation campus coming into Alexandria. So it's a very dynamic place with a long history.
So do you get a lot of money from the state of Virginia, or they just say you're the state university, but they don't give you a lot of money?
Yeah, well, that's probably true for every state university, but the reality is we have a very good partnership. We've lost resources from the state in past recessions, but I think we have come into great alignment in terms of our shared responsibility for the economy and over the last several years. So I feel good about that partnership. We'd love to have more resources from the state, but we do pretty well.
I think, if I recall, the University of Virginia gets roughly 4% of their funds from the state of Virginia. You are in the single digits as well?
Not quite. We're, as a land grant, we do have a special allocation that goes into that mission, which we have an office in every county, every city of the Commonwealth. We have 11 agricultural research and extension centers around the state in partnership with Virginia State University. So we get a little more as a result of that. We're probably around 15% or 16% of our total revenue comes from the state. And then about 25% of our instructional revenue, the university instructional budget that comes from the state.
What percentage of your students come from Virginia?
We have 71% of our undergraduates are Virginians at the moment.
And what about from Washington, D.C.?
About 40% of our students come from the region, from the DC area, and most from Northern Virginia, but we get a lot from Maryland and DC and also New Jersey, New York. So we're kind of an East Coast, we're a mountain campus in Appalachia with a little bit of the South, a little bit of the Northeast, and a lot of the DC area.
What is a Hokie?
Well, Hokie that term is a made up term, came from 1896 from a college cheer that started Hokie, Hokie, Hokie High. And at that point, we had turkey as our mascot, known as the gobbler. Our colors were gray and black. So we've come a long way. Now we're orange and maroon, and the Hokie is a character that looks a little bit like a turkey, but even little kids would like to go up and give it a big hug. So Hokies are unique to Virginia Tech, and if you ask what's a Hokie, the response is I am.
So in 2007, Virginia Tech was hit by a tragedy. 32 students were killed, 32 people were killed, and I think 23 injured. Has the university, I won't say you can recover from that, but how does the university deal with that tragedy today?
Well, it's really part of our culture in a lot of ways, part of our history. Every year we have a recognition of those we lost, and it involves thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of people, depending on the year. We meet with the family, so there's really an intimate relationship with those we lost. There's a memorial right in the center of campus, and I think for me, every day when I walk on campus, I see it and reflect. It did reveal a very strong community at Virginia Tech, and that's something we've continued to build upon, and I think it'll go on forever. We really have committed to making that part of that remembrance part of our culture going forward.
Let's deal with the biggest challenge that universities are having today, relatively speaking, which is, are you going to bring your students back? I think you've made an announcement recently. What are you going to do? Bring them back in person, online? How are you going to deal with all that?
It'll be a hybrid. We made an announcement on June 8th of our basic plan, and it will involve bringing students back, but with public health guidelines at the forefront. We anticipate about 30% of the student, maybe a third of the student experience will be in person, small classes, the things that have to be done in person are done best in person, but large lectures, those will be online and remote. Various modes that we're exploring, but we really have to take this public health crisis seriously. So coming back to campus, everybody wants to come back, but it's going to be different in the fall until we have a vaccine or the virus mutates. But for the foreseeable future, we're going to have to live by the public health guidelines.
So who is at greater risk, the students or the faculty members? Because the faculty members tend to be older, and aren't they at greater risk, or is that not the case so much anymore?
Well, that's true, but I think the reality is that it's a community-wide responsibility, not just for Virginia Tech. I'm speaking of the Blacksburg campus, but where we have most of our students and faculty, but the community we're embedded in. So we have to look at it holistically. An outbreak among our students may not put many of them at serious risk, although some would be, but it would put those in our community who are more vulnerable at risk. So everybody has to treat it as their responsibility if we're going to be successful at this. We can't say, oh, I can ignore it because I'm not at risk technically. The community's at risk. So well, that's part of what we're doing, is working on the culture to make sure that people understand that their actions have implications for people they haven't met.
So if you come back to campus, do you have a dorm you have your own room, or are you still going to share 2 and 3 in a room? How does that work? And what about sharing bathrooms? How does that work?
Well, we struggled with that when we were early on thinking about how to do that. It does seem like it would be better to just have single rooms, but we also had to look at the community that we're embedded in and the limited amount of housing available there. So the balance ended up being that we're bringing back a lot of our students, about 9,000, and they'll be in singles and doubles primarily. There will be shared bathrooms, and we're going to have hyper-vigilant cleaning of those facilities and attention to a wellness commitment that everyone who comes onto campus as a resident will sign or has signed. So it'll be challenging. It'll require everybody to be in concert with the idea that they have responsibility for everyone else's health. But we think we can manage it. It'll be a challenge.
So some people say that when you have a battle between social distancing and teenage hormones will usually prevail. So are you worried that students are going to be not socially distanced enough?
I think it all depends on the culture and the messaging. I am worried about that, but I think if 90% of our students are compliant 90% of the time, we can manage the other 19%. So we will be working hard on the public health communications piece of this. But it is true that students will be students. They're 18 to 22 years old primarily, the undergraduates. But I also know that we've been through a lot as an institution, and when Hokies need to perform, when they need to come together as a community, they always do. So I'm fairly optimistic about that.
Okay, and what about wearing masks? Will the students have to wear masks in class, or you don't have to? And suppose they don't wear masks, what's the penalty?
Students will be expected, actually everybody will be expected to wear masks indoors where they can't be physically distant from one another. We are reducing the capacity of our classrooms, and we're doing everything we can in terms of minimizing contact. But yes, we're expecting masks. The students who've agreed to live in the housing on campus have signed a Hokie wellness commitment, which does expect masks. And if we do have problems, they will be subject to the student conduct process. But the reality is that we're all going to have to exhibit quite a bit of grace here. There are all sorts of exceptions where masks are not easily used by some students who have health conditions or something similar. And so we have to be aware of the fact that every individual is a little different, but it will be a challenge. I think that it's not enforcement that will make that work, it's culture.
What about athletic events? Can you really play football and be socially distanced at the same time?
That is going to be a challenge, and we're slowly bringing back our student athletes as well as our clinical students onto campus and trying to understand better how the dynamics are going to work. We're a little bit away from understanding what kind of fan participation is going to be possible in our stadiums and coliseums. Right now, not much, but hopefully Virginia is doing well in terms of our progress, unlike some other areas of the country. So I'm somewhat optimistic in that regard, but we're taking it step by step.
When students come back, do you expect protests relating to George Floyd killing and similar incidents that have happened in the United States? And what is the racial composition of Virginia Tech?
Yes, we do expect student activism, and I think it's appropriate. Matter of fact, we're already meeting with our student leaders and with various organizations associated with our students of color and our faculty of color and our staff of color. So yes, that is not going to be something that we wait to happen. We're working on it right now. We're having those conversations. Fortunately, Virginia Tech has been pretty proactive over the last 5 or 6 years in terms of diversifying the student body. We have, in our incoming class, we're at 18% underrepresented minority. About 65% of our students on campus now are what you call white residents of the United States. So we've got a very diverse population in terms of international students, underrepresented minority, and it's getting every year a little bit more diverse. So we can't ignore these. We may be in the mountains in Appalachia, but we can't ignore what's going on around us nationally. Our students are coming from all sorts of places around the world, and it's vibrant and challenging, but we will have those, not just conversations, we'll be taking action.
Now, do you have any Confederate monuments, memorials, or things like that on your campus that you expect will have to be taken down or not?
We don't in the usual sense. We were founded in 1872, but we have, being in the South, we have a legacy of individuals and institutions that created Virginia Tech. And so, yes, we're not immune from that. We have various buildings named after people that were involved with the Confederate Army. That's not surprising. We have all sorts of institutional relics that I think reflect on institutional racism and the essentially the way our country was created. So we're not immune from it. We're not. We don't have Confederate monuments in the sense of institutions that are older than we are.
So, final question, Dr. Sands. What would you like the Washington business community to most know about Virginia Tech?
Well, we've been in the region for 50 years. As I mentioned, about 40% of our students come from the region. We have at least 60,000 alumni in the very near proximity to DC, and we're coming in big. We've got the Innovation Campus that was part of the deal with Amazon with the state. It's in parallel, called the Tech Talent Investment Program. We're building that campus with our partners in North Potomac Yard, and we're going to grow. So I think we're going to be converting a lot of people who aren't Hokies now to become Hokies, and looking forward to becoming an even bigger part of the community.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sands, and thank you very much for coming this morning. Okay?
Thank you for having me.